May 15, 1942 marks the official activation date for the U.S. 93rd Infantry Division, colored, for service in World War II, commencing a story of profound courage and resilience that African American soldiers faced against two formidable enemies, the Imperial Japanese Army abroad and the deeply rooted hatred and discrimination within their own segregated military. Their narrative is defined by the necessity of overcoming obstacles, not merely battling a foreign force, but fighting widespread prejudice that actively doubted their capability to perform with exemplary courage on the battlefield. This fight for respect was an echo of a history already written. The original 93rd Infantry Division, an all-black outfit, had already proven its mettle in ferocious battles in France. There was considerable apprehension among the white-dominated U.S. Army regarding what to expect from thousands of armed African Americans concentrated in one place. Crucially, the French command had no such hesitation, readily welcoming the regiments of the 93rd, assigning them to French divisions, and equipping them with French rations and weapons, forcing the black soldiers to fight using French military tactics.
The men of the 93rd's World War I component, particularly the 396th Regiment, achieved continuous combat days far exceeding any similar white American unit, showcasing their undeniable bravery and earning them the prestigious Croix de Guerre for gallantry in action. This early, powerful proof of their fighting spirit set a high standard, yet it was one that the division's soldiers would be forced to reprove entirely when the 93rd was reactivated for the new conflict. By World War II, the U.S. Army fielded 68 infantry divisions, but only 2 were entirely black, the 92nd, destined for Italy, and the 93rd, slated for the Pacific Theater. Their military training began at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, on that May 15, 1942 date. The post was chosen for its isolation, based on the Army's flawed assumption that the remote location would minimize racial friction with the surrounding civilian populace, a hope dashed by the frequent and often deadly fights between black and white soldiers and local residents. The military installation itself was relentlessly segregated. Separate barracks, separate mess halls, and distinct service clubs were the norm for officers and enlisted men of both races. This segregation extended tragically even to medical care, which featured 2 hospitals, one strictly for white patients and one designated for black patients. The latter was staffed entirely by African American medical personnel, and with nearly 950 patient beds, became America's largest African American hospital. The division was burdened by deep-seated resentment and institutional bias from the start. The Army's method for testing military aptitude, the Army General Classification Test, was heavily skewed against the African American recruits. Because many of the soldiers had received a severely substandard education due to institutional racism, a staggering 45% of the division was rated in the lowest score category, Class 5. A number drastically higher than the 8.5% seen in white divisions of similar experience. This bias created an immediate existential threat to the division, seemingly dooming it before basic training could even be completed. The initial instruction was often mocked by the outdated nature of their equipment and training concepts.
The sight of soldiers of the 93rd Infantry Division in training at Fort Huachuca in May 1942, manning a World War I-style trench while equipped with the older British-style Brodie helmets, underscored the Army's low initial priority and low expectations for the all-black unit. Compounding the equipment issue was the prejudiced reality of the officer corps. While the enlisted men were black, most of the division's officers were white, and being assigned to command a black unit was widely and correctly seen as the kiss of death for a white officer's career. Many white lieutenants, including West Point graduates, harbored deep resentment over their assignments, often actively seeking transfers away from Fort Huachuca. This atmosphere of contempt permeated the ranks. One white captain was reported to have refused to return a new black lieutenant's salute, simply stating, "I hate n." even the appointment of Southern-born commanders, Major General Hall and Brigadier General Spence, who were chosen under the flawed premise that their Southern upbringing might help them relate better to African American soldiers, failed to alleviate the underlying racial tension. After their initial 17 weeks of basic soldiering instruction, the 93rd underwent 13 weeks of specialty training before progressing to large-scale war games. It was during these 3rd Army Louisiana maneuvers in April 1943 that the division finally began to see a significant upgrade in its equipment, a necessary step toward genuine combat readiness, following the division's conversion to the modern triangular concept. Now consisting of 3 regiments, the 25th, 368th, and 369th, and 4 field artillery battalions, including the 594th Field Artillery Battalion, the division required modern equipment to be effective. The image of Private Clarence Jones of the 594th Field Artillery Battalion, now outfitted with the essential modern M1 helmet and the M1 carbine, symbolized the division's visible step closer to military utility. However, this physical readiness was still opposed at the highest levels of command. Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall and Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair were known to favor breaking up black combat divisions into smaller, non-combat support units. Despite this resistance, the critical need for infantry divisions in the Pacific, combined with mounting pressure from the African American press and growing white public support, forced a change in policy. The order was given in January 1944. The 93rd Division would deploy to the Pacific Theater. This was not a welcome embrace, however. Upon their arrival in the theater of operations, the prevailing white prejudice within the Army establishment dictated that many of the black units, including elements of the 93rd, would initially be assigned to perform menial labor and logistical chores, frustrating their desire for frontline action. The image of the 593rd Field Artillery Battalion, an element of the 93rd Division, unloading 105mm ammunition on Bougainville in April 1944, explicitly captured the reality of this unjust assignment, delaying their fight for true equality. The frustrating assignment of the 593rd Field Artillery Battalion to purely logistical duties on Bougainville in April 1944 was an undeniable consequence of the institutional bias that viewed black soldiers as capable of physical labor, but mentally or emotionally unfit for frontline fighting. This injustice was continuously challenged by the African American press, whose reports, like those by Walter F. White of the NAACP, helped turn the tide of public opinion and pressure the Army. The soldiers knew that their only path to equality in the eyes of the military establishment was to secure undeniable combat success. The opportunity finally arrived in late March 1944 when the 25th Infantry Regiment, one of the 93rd's primary combat components, was sent from Guadalcanal to Empress Augusta Bay on the southern end of Bougainville. The fight for the island had been raging since late 1943 against Japanese soldiers tenaciously hiding out in the dense jungle, and the 25th Regiment was placed under the operational command of the 23rd Americal Infantry Division. The Americal Division's command structured the assignment as a highly monitored trial. Each battalion of the 25th was parceled out and attached to an Americal regiment for more extensive schooling in jungle warfare. This was a probationary period where their combat effectiveness would be judged under fire. The environment was a brutal shock. The Arizona desert training was replaced by a steaming malarial climate marked by a pervasive stench of rotting vegetation and decay. The men quickly adapted to the realities of Pacific warfare, including the need to spot Japanese snipers who, when wounded or too ill to retreat, would tie themselves to banyan trees, becoming fixed, deadly posts. The patrols conducted by the 25th, ranging from squad to company size, were closely monitored, but the regiment soon began to perform with impressive competence. The first clear, undeniable combat success came on March 31st, when Private James H. O'Banner, during an aggressive push on Hills 500 and 501, became the first enlisted man of the 93rd Division to kill an enemy soldier.
This action was a crucial, concrete step in dismantling the institutionalized bias against the division. The American Command, watching closely, began to see undeniable proof of the 93rd's capabilities, recognizing the shift from a unit doubted by its superiors to one that was ready for the fight. The soldiers of the 25th Regiment gained confidence and skill, quickly becoming proficient in clearing the Japanese out of their numerous bivouac areas. Their operational effectiveness was now on display for all to see.
The photograph of a 25th Infantry Regiment soldier supporting the American Division taking aim at Japanese troops in an enemy bivouac area on April 6, 1944, confirmed the unit's full integration into frontline operations. They were no longer confined to logistical tasks. They were active combat infantry, engaged in the dangerous work of rooting out the enemy. However, the path to respect was paved with continued sacrifice. The very next day, April 7, 1944, would be marked as the worst day for the 25th Regiment on Bougainville, featuring a high-stakes, company-sized special patrol of 180 soldiers from the 3rd Battalion's Company K, led by Captain James J. Curran. This mission was of massive symbolic importance. It was the 25th's first major operation conducted almost entirely on its own, and its outcome was set to determine the combat future of the entire 93rd Division. High Command understood the stakes, even sending 2 Army Signal Corps photographers to document the advance, underscoring the political and strategic importance of this trial. The soldiers were under immense pressure, knowing that any failure would be immediately used by their detractors to reinforce old prejudices. The patrol quickly turned into a prolonged, chaotic engagement against fierce Japanese resistance, forcing the men to fight not only the enemy, but the relentless, exhausting terrain of the jungle. Casualties began to mount rapidly. The test of the 93rd Division's discipline and dedication reached a climax on Hill 290. This piece of high ground became a desperate, slippery battlefield where the Japanese resistance was strongest. As the fighting raged, the unit's ability to maintain discipline and care for its wounded was tested to the extreme. The act of evacuating a casualty under fire is one of the most physically and emotionally taxing acts in warfare. And for the soldiers of Company K, this act was not just military duty, but a powerful, visible statement to their observers. The unit's litter bearers engaged in an exhausting struggle, refusing to abandon a fallen comrade. The raw, desperate image of the litter bearers of Company K, 25th Regiment, struggling up the difficult slope of Hill 290 with a wounded comrade during the fighting on April 7, 1944, was the ultimate visual proof of the division's valor. This demonstration of unit cohesion and morale, performed under enemy fire, directly contradicted the prevailing prejudice narrative. The chaotic patrol resulted in heavy American casualties, but the unwavering bravery displayed by the troops ultimately secured their reputation. The regiment's performance in this trial by fire convinced commanders on the ground, and the 24th Regiment successfully transitioned from being a unit on probation to a seasoned unit of proven combat quality. With this reputation confirmed, elements of the 93rd were rapidly moved into more critical operational roles, supporting the ongoing campaign to secure Bougainville. The 24th Infantry Regiment was also attached to the 23rd American Division to assist in consolidating the territorial gains and conducting aggressive clearing operations against the remaining Japanese holdouts, confirming the trust now placed in them. The color of their skin no longer mattered as much as their proficiency. The 24th Infantry's integration into the American structure was a pragmatic military decision driven by necessity, but it was also a profound admission that the soldiers were essential to the war effort. They were aggressive, effective, and fully committed to their mission, working in coordination with armored support to root out the remaining enemy.
The visual record of troops of the 24th Infantry attached to the American Division gathering behind a Sherman tank before assaulting enemy positions near Empress Augusta Bay in 1944 definitively illustrates the full acceptance of the African American troops into the frontline assault strategy. They were no longer confined to menial tasks, they were the aggressive spearhead. General Douglas MacArthur, recognizing the need for fighting men and swayed by the undeniable evidence, sought to shape the 93rd into a reliable combat division. With Bougainville secured, the 93rd Division's elements received new, critical assignments across the Pacific. By November 1944, the 25th Regiment was moved to Finchashof in New Guinea to bolster U.S. defenses, and in December 1944, the 24th Regiment was sent to Saipan and Tinian for mopping up in garrison duties. This pattern of proving their worth, being moved to a critical theater, and then proving it again, defined their service. The division's ultimate destiny would take them toward the Philippines, where the final, most definitive proof of their valor would be secured under command of Brigadier General Leonard R. Boyd.
Starting in November 1944, the 93rd Division's operational scope broadened significantly, moving beyond the initial testing ground of Bougainville and into a series of crucial theaters across the Southwest Pacific. The 25th Regiment's move to Finchhofen, New Guinea, and the 24th Regiment's deployment to Saipan and Tinian in December 1944 were clear signs that the division's combat capabilities were now trusted by the High Command. These assignments were crucial for securing the rear areas and freeing up white divisions for the next massive assaults toward the Philippines. The division continued to operate under the command of Brigadier General Leonard R. Boyd, focusing on the Halmahera Island Group and Morotai in eastern Indonesia's Maluku Islands. This area was strategically vital to General MacArthur's ultimate objective, the grand return to the Philippines. The neighboring island of Morotai became a key stepping stone, providing a necessary base of operations. The Japanese had initially underestimated Moratai's defense, but the island's environment, marked by lush jungles, rugged mountains, and rampant malaria, made securing it a tough assignment that perfectly suited the now battle-hardened troops of the 93rd. The division continued its dedication, consistently fulfilling their promise that black soldiers were every bit as brave as their white counterparts through grit and operational success. The unit was relentless in pursuing its objectives, knowing that every action contributed not only to the war effort, but to the fight for equality at home. Their deployment had finally moved from trials to trust.
The ultimate historical vindication of the 93rd Infantry Division's combat quality occurred on August 2, 1945, just 2 weeks before Japan's final surrender. It was on the island of Morotai, Dutch New Guinea, that soldiers of the 25th Infantry Regiment achieved a distinction unmatched by any other American unit in the Pacific War. They successfully captured the highest-ranking Japanese officer taken prisoner during the entire conflict. This event was a concrete, irrefutable achievement that instantly silenced many of the earlier institutional doubts about the division's capabilities and proved their operational excellence and persistence. This success was not an anomaly. It was the result of 2 years of hard fighting and unwavering commitment, validating the trust that General MacArthur had placed in their fighting ability. By the war's final days, the 93rd had advanced deep into the Philippines campaign, reaching both Mindanao and Leyte. Their consistent, reliable performance throughout the grueling campaigns, from the chaotic patrol on Bougainville's Hill 290 to the final clearing operations in the deep Pacific, proved conclusively that black soldiers were every bit as brave as their white counterparts, succeeding in every mission assigned to them, regardless of the challenge. The sheer volume of their operational success meant that the cost in lives and service had a tangible measure of honor.
The hard-won achievements of the 93rd Division resulted in a documented record of sacrifice and valor. The division collectively earned an impressive total of 825 military awards for valor and meritorious service. This count included 1 Distinguished Service Cross, 5 Silver Stars, and 686 Bronze Stars. When the official word of Japan's surrender came in August 1945, the initial reaction across the Pacific was one of pure, unrestrained celebration. Due to a shortage of fireworks, the soldiers resorted to firing their rifles into the air in triumph, joining in the spontaneous explosion of joy.
However, even this moment of shared victory was tragically and immediately marred by the persistent scourge of discrimination. Sergeant James Yancey of the 391st Infantry Regiment recounted the bitter reality. As the black troops celebrated by firing their weapons, a white officer approached, ordered them to cease firing, and confiscated all their weapons, while white troops nearby were allowed to continue their joyful celebratory firing without interference. This act of blatant prejudice served as a cruel foreshadowing of the reality awaiting them back home. The war was over, but the fight for equality was beginning anew. The 93rd Infantry Division eventually sailed back to the U.S. and was officially deactivated at their former port of departure, Camp Stoneman, California, on February 3, 1946. For many veterans, the return to civilian status meant a swift, harsh return to the oppressive reality of racism, Jim Crow laws, institutionalized discrimination, and severe restrictions on their personal freedoms. While the American military would eventually be desegregated 2 years later by order of President Harry S. Truman, the men of the 93rd Division had earned the right to equality through their actions, not through executive order. Their bravery, demonstrated from the trenches of World War I to the islands of the Philippines, was a profound testament to the ultimate American soldier.